Rose Harsent was 22 years old and one of Peasenhall's liveliest residents. She was employed as a servant in Providence House. This was the residence of Deacon Crisp, the local Baptist elder. Rose had many hobbies. She spent a lot of her spare time singing in the church choir, but she was also a big collector of X-rated verses. Rose was acquainted with William Gardner, a lay Primitive Methodist elder in his mid-40s. William was also foreman at the local sea drill and a man of God. He was also trustee at the local Sunday school, and more importantly, he was the leader of the choir, where the young Rose sang. He had been married for 14 years to a woman named Georgina Caddy, who had presented him with 8 children, 6 of whom were still alive. As in every little town, rumors and gossip were always around, including an unpleasant little scandal involving the choir master and a singer. One evening in May 1901, 2 people, George Wright and Alfonso Skinner, saw Rose enter a small building known as the Doctor's Chapel. When the 2 young men saw William Gardner conveniently follow her into the chapel, they could not believe their eyes. They quietly hurried over to the building and put their ears to the outside of the wall to listen. Wright and Skinner heard Rose yelp, "Uh-oh," and then laugh. She then told Gardner that what they were doing was in the Bible. She was referring to the 38th chapter of Genesis, dealing with Tamar and Onan. In the Old Testament it says, Onan spilled his seed upon the ground. The 2 men knew exactly what they were talking about and what had just taken place in the Doctor's Chapel. Harsent and Gardner were practicing something a good deal more than reciting hymns. Why else would you be talking about spilling seed on the ground and in the church? The 2 stoops could hardly wait to tell everyone, and word soon spread like wildfire through the town of Peasenhall. It didn't take long for Gardner to hear what was being said about him. He exploded with rage and denied everything. He was a man of God after all. He demanded a written apology from the 2 men. Wright and Skinner refused. They said their story was nothing more than the truth. The elders of the church also heard the rumors. They then launched an investigation into William Gardner's allegedly scandalous private life. An informal trial was held by the senior members of the local Methodist sect to question Gardner's morals. Although Wright, Skinner, and Gardner all testified in front of the elders, Rose Harsent, one of the main characters in the scandal, was absent. Confronted with they said he said situation, the elders opted for damage control. Instead, they announced that the charges against Gardner were unproven. They hoped this would be enough to make everyone forget this embarrassing little matter. Naturally, the matter was not forgotten by anyone, least of all a local meddler and Methodist lay preacher named Henry Rouse. Weeks after the Doctor Chapel incident, Rouse claimed he saw Gardner and Harsent together. They were walking down a back lane one night hand in hand. Fearing yet another scandal would do the chapel a great deal of harm, Rouse said he gave Gardner a stern lecture on propriety. He recalled that Gardner apologized and vowed to watch his behavior more carefully in the future. But a month later, while Rouse is in the pulpit giving a sermon, he just happened to glance behind him at the choir. He saw Gardner sitting with his feet up on Rose Harsent's lap. Gardner himself denied either incident had ever taken place. Sometime around late November 1901, Rose became pregnant. She never revealed the name of the father. In fact, after her efforts to induce an abortion failed, she attempted to keep her condition a secret. She knew she could not hide the pregnancy forever. She would be faced not only with losing her reputation, but her job as well. There is no evidence that she considered marriage to her lover, suggesting the man was in no position to offer her a respectable way out of her predicament. Rose continued to try her worrisome situation until June 1st, 1902. That morning, her father went to Providence House to bring Rose some of her laundry. He walked into the kitchen only to find his daughter lying on the floor near a staircase. She was dead. She was wearing only socks and a nightdress. She had been killed by large stab wounds to her throat and chest. After her death, paraffin had been used to burn her body. It was an attempt by the murderer to hide her identity. The fire consumed most of her nightgown and charred her arms and lower body. A broken lamp was lying beside her, as well as a broken bottle. The bottle had originally held medicine and still bore a label that read, "For Miss Gardner's children." Also found with the body was a charred piece of newspaper. The publication was the East Anglian Daily Times, a paper the Deacon household never read, but William Gardner was a subscriber. There were no footprints left, even though there was a large pool of blood on the floor. This meant that Rose Harsent's murderer had stabbed her in the chest, then turned her toward the wall before slashing her throat from behind. A search of the dead girl's bedroom revealed a note someone had written her the previous day. The note said, "I will try to see you tonight at 12 o'clock at your place. If you put a light in your window at 10 o'clock for about 10 minutes, then you can take it out again. Don't have a light in your room at 12, as I will come around to the back." The handwriting of this note looked very much like William Gardner's. Villagers also took note of the fact that William lived only 200 yards away from Providence House. A neighbor recalled seeing Gardner standing on his front porch shortly before 10 p.m. The neighbor also noted that there was a light at the top of Providence House. James Morse, a gamekeeper who had been walking on Peasenhall's main road at about 5 in the morning, testified that he had seen a set of muddy footprints leading from Gardner's cottage to Providence House and back again. He then provided authorities with a sketch of these footprints, which contained marks matching a pair of shoes belonging to Gardner. To the authorities investigating the murder, William was their number one suspect. The working theory was that Rose arranged this midnight meeting to demand that Gardner provide support for her and the child he had fathered, but instead of owning up, he took care of this embarrassing problem by getting rid of her and the unborn baby, permanently. Gardner denied everything. He did not write the note, he denied making a secret visit to Rose's room, he was not the father of her unborn child, and he most certainly did not kill her. It did him all a little good. He was arrested and charged with murder. The police were unable to pinpoint exactly when Rose died. The doctors who examined her body could only narrow it down to between 12:30 and 6:30 a.m. The Crisps testified that on that fatal night they had been wakened by a scream and a thud, but instead of investigating they went back to bed. They also could not say as to what time that night that this had happened. The bad news continued to pile up for William Gardner. A handwriting expert concluded that William had written the note found in Rose's room, and the envelope containing the letter was identical to those used at his workplace. He owned a penknife which doctors stated could have been used as the murder weapon. It had been newly sharpened and cleaned. When the police examined it, blood was found inside the hinge. The medical experts could not say if the blood was animal or human. William Gardner claimed he had used a knife to skin and disembowel a rabbit. A neighbor, Herbert Stammer, stated that an hour before Rose's body was discovered, he saw Gardner start a bonfire near his wash house and was seen throwing things into the fire. When Gardner went on trial in November 1902, his lawyer, Ernest Wilde, put up an aggressive, convincing defense. Wilde made some efforts to insinuate that Rose's killer was a young neighbor named Frederick Davis. Davis had, he said, at Rose's request, provided her with copies of pornographic poems, as well as the book on abortion. He admitted that he had written Rose graphic love letters and a desire to better. But as Wilde finally conceded, there was no reason whatsoever to believe Davis had any connection with her death. After the judge delivered a lecture to Davis, he was dismissed as a witness, as well as a suspect. Wilde strongly decried the intense local prejudice against his client. He argued that there was no proof that Gardner and the dead girl had an improper relationship. He dismissed Rouse as a liar inspired by his jealousy of Gardner's superior position in the church. According to Wilde, Morris was mistaken about when he had seen the footprints and simply invented the whole tale. As Wilde had been unable to shake the testimony of the prosecution's handwriting experts, he asserted that even if Gardner had written the note arranging the midnight meeting, that did not necessarily mean he had killed her. He emphasized that no blood had been found on any of his client's clothing. Gardner claimed he only owned 2 shirts, and no blood was found on any of them. He also claimed his wife only washed his clothes every 2 weeks. The most prominent defense witness was the accused wife, Georgina Gardner. She swore that her husband had been in their bedroom the night of Harsent's death. She said that he had never left her side. She also explained away the broken bottle found near the dead girl. She said that some weeks earlier she had filled the bottle with cold medicine and given it to Rose Harsent, who was suffering from a cold. She claimed the bonfire Herbert Stammer saw was merely to boil a kettle of water. Their next-door neighbor, Amelia Pepper, testified that she had been awake all night. She said she never heard or saw anyone leave Gardner's home. When Gardner himself took the stand, he simply denied every bit of evidence against him, without offering any proof of his innocence. The jury found themselves unable to reach a verdict. It emerged that 11 jurors voted for conviction, but there was one holdout who stated, "I have heard nothing to convince me that he is guilty." Prosecution was determined to try again. Gardner's second trial was opened in January 1903. It was essentially a rehash of the first trial, and when deliberation began, the jury could not reach a verdict. This time it was 11-1 for acquittal. The prosecution decided a third trial would be futile. William Gardner and his family promptly moved to London and lived there until his death in 1941. Rose is buried in the village cemetery. A cross marks her resting place. There is an inscription that reads, "In affectionate remembrance of Rose Annie Harsent, whose life was cruelly taken on the 1st of June 1902 in her 23rd year. A light is from our household, a voice we loved is stilled. A place is vacant in our home that never can be filled."
Welcome to my channel. This is Mr. Scary. Hope you enjoy the show.